right. Good evening, everybody. We're getting ready to start this evening's geology conversation. Just going to wait a few minutes here to let a few more people in. Get a few minutes past 7 to be sure everyone is on their way into the start of the meeting, gets in before we get rolling. So if you'll just bear with us, we'll hang out here for a few and look at our lovely title screen and give everyone just a few more minutes to log in, and then we will get the show, the geology show, rolling. Sorry, I don't have a musical accompaniment to go right here. So. Oh, all right. I see. While we're waiting for a minute or two for folks to get in, our good friend Elaine asks what flowers you're seeing at Preserve. So yeah, yep. There's someone she had mentioned May apples. Yep. Not flowering yet that I've seen, but the leaves are certainly up and very distinctive. Dutchman's breeches, I've seen that in flower, and squirrel, the closely related squirrel corn. Gosh, what else? Bloodroot, spring beauty, of course. Yep, trout lily. A lot of trout lily leaves up, and also they're starting to flower. Yep, Shannon's just got them all here. Harbinger of spring, toothwort, cutleaf toothwort, specifically, and most of our preserves, that's a little more common. Oh, Siberian squill, yes, that is flowering, but we give that a boo because it is not native and just can be a little bit invasive. So it is pretty. So if it's in your yard, we don't blame you. But try to think what else. I know I'm missing some from looking around out in the woods briefly, but things are definitely popping. Let's see, I've seen
Bonnie, can you weigh in? Yeah,
what you say?
Bonnie Hayden and I went to Canyon Forest just a couple of days ago and saw all the ones listed here so far, and I'm trying to think if there are any others.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yep.
Saw Jacob's Ladder today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was at Cascades, actually, going up the boardwalk.
Oh, neat. Well, things are really getting going.
Saw a twin leaf a couple of weeks ago before the tornado over at McCormick's Creek. Lots and lots of twin leaf there.
Oh, nice. You hadn't seen a jack in the pulpit. Very nice. I don't think I've seen one of those yet. I haven't been out enough.
Yeah,
really good. And
we saw wood poppies today. Lots of wood poppies.
Oh, nice.
And
nice.
one fat larkspur.
Oh, neat. Well, it really is getting going. And as Elaine pointed out, that also sadly there are calorie pears everywhere. They're kind of getting a little bit past their main bloom time, but they're still calorie pear trees blooming white out there, and maybe they look pretty from a distance, but they are invasive and also don't smell that great either. So it's always a reminder this time of year how they have really taken over a lot of roadsides and old fields and other more kind of recently disturbed areas. So, but a lot of good native things are really popping right now. So, very neat. Well, what do you think? It's on my watch, it's about 7 after. Shall we get rolling, you think, Kate?
Yeah, I've got a lot to go
All
through.
right,
so-
exactly. If you're just joining us, yes, anyone who's joining us late, you can see the recording that Russ has a ton of geology to share with us tonight. So let's get going. So hi, thanks everyone for joining us and listening to our little preamble here. I'm John Lawrence, Executive Director of Sycamore Land Trust. And as you can see, we are here tonight for a conservation conversation with Russell Boulding, talking about the geology of Sycamore's Canyon Forest Nature Preserve and the Amy Weingartner Branigin Peninsula Preserve. So a lot of neat geology out there, and Russ has put a lot of work into putting together a really neat program for us. But first, just to kick things off, a couple of quick words about Sycamore and what's upcoming. Our next conservation conversation is going to be coming up talking about the wild lights of bean blossom bottoms and beyond. Talking about fireflies, what fascinating insect, and we have been lucky enough to have a very rare, at least for our area, firefly found out at Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve. So join us at the next go round and learn about fireflies. It'll be really neat. Few quick words about Sycamore Land Trust, just in case anyone is joining us here for the first time. We're a local nonprofit formed in 1990, and as you can see, preserving land, restoring habitat, and connecting people to nature is what we do. You can see we have protected properties all across southern Indiana. Our mission is to preserve the beauty, health, and diversity of southern Indiana's natural landscape through strategic land conservation and environmental education. And speaking of spring beauties and the Canyon Forest Nature Preserve, there are some with also some trout lily leaves you can see. And as I mentioned, we were founded in 1990. We're accredited by the National Land Trust Alliance. We have protected over 11,000 acres for forever. We have over 30 miles of free hiking trails for people to visit at 13 of our nature preserves. And one of those, Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve, you can see in the photo, and you can see a little bit of our raised boardwalk that goes through the wetlands. That is, as far as we know, one of the longest boardwalks in the Midwest. And we connect people through our free environmental education program. And all this work is powered by our 1,300 plus members and all of our hundreds of wonderful, wonderful volunteers. It's truly a team effort, and we can't do it without you. And if you would like to know more about Sycamore Land Trust, please get in touch. You can find us easily on the web at sycamorelandtrust.org. And of course, got all our emails and phone number and mailing address on the website. And if you don't have one already, we'd be glad to send you a free print copy of our Nature Preserve Guide that talks about those public nature preserves. In fact, the new 2023 edition with a few little updates and is just hot off the press as of today. And so anyway, without further ado, like to turn it over to the one and only Russell Boulding. Russ has got a long and impressive bio here. I won't read through all of it, but suffice to say that he has been doing geology in the Indiana area for quite a long time. He's married to a wonderful geologist and is also the son-in-law of the one and only Dr. Henry Gray, who is quite the grand old man of Indiana geology. I think that's how Russ put it. I couldn't put any better. So, and Russell just been a wonderful help to Sycamore in so many ways as a volunteer, and really look forward to having him dive a little bit deeper into two of our more geologically interesting nature preserves here tonight. So let me turn it over to Russ, because as he said, he's got a lot of ground to cover here. Maybe that's a bad pun not intended there.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks, Russ.
Okay, yep,
Appreciate it.
yep, thank you, John. And let's see, okay, now I want to get head up. Good to see many friends here. Let me, okay, yeah, I'll go. Let's see. I'm still screen sharing. So anyway, this gives an overview of what we'll be looking at. A month ago, I think on this date, I gave an overview of the 12 public preserves, and there are 2 preserves that just have such a fantastic geology that I asked if I could have another session to focus on those 2. And so that's what we'll be looking at this evening. Amy Weingartner Branigin Peninsula Preserve and Canyon Forest. So those who saw the last one, I've got this presentation, which PowerPoint, which will be available once I maybe put some finishing touches on it to access online. It's set up so that you can navigate around the document by clicking. So here we've got and oops, back to index. Oh, and so let's get started here. And unfortunately, my headers are covered up a bit here, but we'll make do. So Amy Weingartner, AWBP for short, 8-acre preserve in the Norman Upland. It has a number of features of special geologic interest. The Mount Carmel Fault and a related limestone quarry, the Plio-Pleistocene Lafayette gravel, and it has an Illinoisan age glacial outwash terrace and gravel, and a Sangamon geosalt. So this is a 1957 topographic map of the peninsula before Lake Monroe went in. One point of interest which affected the quaternary geology was we have the North Fork of Salt Creek coming down here, and then the Middle Fork, which actually has just a little bit to the east had the confluence with the South Fork. So this is a point where the middle, North and South Forks come together. So it's, and there would have been glacial outwash coming down both of these coming together. And so that's provides a bit of an explanation why, even though it's a small area that wasn't mapped on the soil survey, we have outwash terrace. This is an air photo, 1960, before Lake Monroe went in, and you can see this little dark spot is the little quarry that we'll see a picture of later. It's a little, but this is the floodplain of the Salt Creek, and you can see how there's been, kind of flood waters washing through there. And then here's an air photo, 1967, shortly after the Lake Monroe was filled up. And here's a 1994 photographic map showing the pool level of Lake Monroe. So got the bedrock stratigraphy, And location of quaternary terraces. Here we've got two major formations in the peninsula, the Borden, mostly siltstone group, and then we've got a little area here of Ramp Creek limestone, right in the transition between the Borden and the Sanders groups. And that's not supposed to be there in the way normal the general geology is. And so when you see something out of place like that, it means there's something interesting going on geologically. We also just see the green and the blue. These are outwash alluvial terraces from glacial outwash. So the Bourne and Sanders were deposited some 350 million years ago. And we'll get down to the little bit. In fact, I might ask Henry Loop if he can remind me what the age is we just recently got from the terrace. Last year, Geological Survey collected some cores of outwash sands from Paintown, and that has been dated. And I had predicted that it would be pre-Illinoisan, and I was wrong. That's one of the great things about geology and science is we develop hypotheses and we test them and we learn whether we're right or wrong. Here's the peninsula. This is quaternary or bedrock and quaternary geology of the area. In the center here, we have the Leesville anticline. And you wouldn't normally have an anticline. Those who saw my previous presentation, the sediments in Indiana dip gently to the southwest. And an anticline is where you have the sediments, the oldest, or essentially you have the sediments going over either side of the top of the anticline. And the reason for that is we have the Mount Carmel faults, and it literally goes right along the edge of the east end of AWBP Peninsula. Just really wonderful to have such a geologic feature in a preserve like this. So if you look at the elevation of this limestone, which is Ramp Creek formation, and you look over here where it is, there's a 100-foot offset. This is 100 feet higher to the west than it is down here. And so the limestone has been, the block has been thrust down 100 feet below what you would, more than 100 feet below what you would expect from the normal slope of sediment. And give a little regional context for the Mount Carmel fault. This is the Illinois Basin here. This is Mount Carmel fault. There are a number of faults throughout the basin, only one major one in southern. There are a number of smaller ones, but this is the one named fault. And AWBP is right on the edge of it. And here's a map that shows the structure contours. It shows the anticline. So AWBP is down here with that little bit of limestone. And the contours here you see are the elevation of the Borden formation. And so you can see that it's anticline, it's almost a bit of a dome-like structure here. And so the Borden siltstone slopes off down in this direction and this direction. And so with the a little bit of limestone. This is the first real cliff that you see when you're walking on the trail coming up to the top of the high point of the peninsula. This is the quarry, which don't have a date on it. It might well date from say maybe 1930s. Civilian Conservation Corps might have opened this. And another aspect, interesting feature, which I won't have time to talk about, is that characteristic soil feature of limestone is this very red colored terra rosa, it's called, it's clay. And that's, but it's just absolutely amazing in the context to have this preserve that has this little block of limestone preserved where you wouldn't normally expect it to be. And this is an overview of the, say, Pleistocene features of Amy Weingartner and the area. So what I've done here is I've been mapping the elevation or maximum elevation of terraces. And so the soils these are soils associated with different types of outwash. Pecan is a fine-grained, Park is a sandy outwash, and Park Chetwynd has sandy outwash and gravel. And here we've got this little bit of, it's not actually on the soil survey, but what they call a inclusion. It's not quite a big enough area to be mapped on a soil survey, but it's Park Chetwynd. And so you can see the elevations are go quite a bit above the level of the lake is generally around 540 feet or 45 feet. And so these were all deposited by the Illinoisan glacier. And outwash coming from North Fork, outwash, here's the Middle Fork and the South Fork. Both of those had outwash flowing into what's now Lake Monroe. And so the other really fantastic feature of AWBP is Lafayette gravel. There was, say, Carol Ritter asked a wonderful question the last time about that. I talked about a little bit, but we have, and I'm gonna show a number of locations here. So we have here at 730 feet, we have an occurrence of this gravel at the highest point on the ridgetop, highest point of the landscape. Here we've got what I normally would call a strath position. So it's reworked, landscape eroded, and it's been redeposited at a lower elevation from the original that it was deposited. We also have Lafayette gravel eroding out of the outwash gravel in the outwash terrace, reworked by transported from who knows where by the glacier. So I'm not going to go through all this, but if you're interested in following it, you can get this and follow it. But the Lafayette Formation has a fascinating checkered history. It's no longer recognized as a stratigraphic term by the U.S. Geological Survey, but it's been around since the term's been around since 1891. The important points I'd like to make. Well, this map shows, this is from the original monograph, showing how extensive what he called, McGee mapped as Lafayette gravel. It's generally in the Mississippi embayment area. It's called upland gravel complex. Malott is the primary source of isolated ridgetop occurrences of Lafayette gravel in southern Indiana. And I follow Malott's use of the term to call its occurrences in Indiana. The isolated ridgetop Lafayette-like gravels have been given various local and regional names in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky. Grover gravel, Mounds gravel, Irvine sands, and also sands of the Ohio River Formation in Indiana and Kentucky, although they have a similar topographic position, so they're of interest as representing the ancient or say the late tertiary. So where the Mississippi embayment reaches into southern Illinois, which you can see right down here with these black areas, the Lafayette gravels are pretty continuous, and they were deposited as sort of interfingering alluvial fans to get that continuous coverage. But when you get outside of the Mississippi embayment, you can see they're just small isolated occurrences scattered all over the place. But well, I say a wide geographic area, but not that many. And so Carol Ritter asked another question just before this, and I was able to put this slide in to respond to a question about the Highland Rim and Lexington peneplains, whether there are any remnants in Indiana. And I would, by my interpretation of what I've been finding with the Lafayette gravels, yes. The Highland Rim peneplain, this would have been a relatively flat, not a lot of relief, because a very stable landscape, and so there's say very little relief from the lowest point to the high point. And the Highland Rim was primarily located down in this area, the Lexington peneplain up here. But by my mapping of the Ohio Lafayette gravels in Indiana, none of those locations are actually, maybe this one location here are shown on this map. I would say that the ridgetop occurrences of Lafayette gravel are an indication, because a gravel on a ridgetop, when that was deposited, it was the lowest point in the landscape. And so to have gravel at the highest point in the landscape tells me that that everything below that, any elevation below that, has been eroded out since it was deposited. And so I've been mapping the Lafayette type gravels, their elevations, as an indication of what the land surface was like at the end of the Pliocene. And there's no precise, there's a transition. Well, let's go to the next slide here. So here dates that have been given using cosmogenic dating of upland gravel complex down in this area, Irvine Formation here, Thames River, terraces, and the ancestral Kentucky River terrace. So we've got dates down here in the Mississippi embayment that go beginning of the Pliocene boundaries about 2.1 million years ago. So these were deposited before, during the Pliocene. Here we've got 1 to 2 million years, so that's a very early Pleistocene. Here we've got dates of 1.3, 1.5 million. That's the mid-Pleistocene. So the ages of these gravels span the Pliocene and the Pleistocene. But the fact that they are in ridge top positions suggests that that's they're remnants of the Lexington and Highland Rim peneplains. And here I can trace based on the plotting I've done several Pliocene rivers. This is Amy Weingartner is right there. And you are seeing new information. You're the first folks to see this. After the last presentation, Cal Ritter and I spent a day in Lawrence County, tried to tracking down, chasing Lafayette gravel. We're able to confirm this occurrence and found that in the stream bed of no, not Guthrie. Carol, you'll need to remind me the name of the creek there. But anyway, we found Lafayette gravel in the stream.
Guthrie.
And what's it called?
Guthrie.
Guthrie Creek. Yeah, Guthrie Creek. And so I've traced it up to US 50, and I still haven't found the source, but I'm estimating that it's probably an elevation of about 850 feet there. Still have some more field work to do there. So here's some pictures. This is the distinctive bronze patina of the chert and the and geodes. That's mainly what's left in the gravel. Both are very resistant. And here's the outwash terrace at the end of AWBP. So it's got a very red color, and that's was formed during the Sangamon interglacial after the Illinoisan glaciation glacial episode. So, and Henry Loop, can I ask you to do you remember the date they've got for Paintown on these on the sands?
Russ, I put in the chat. I think it's 180,000.
180,000.
Plus or minus about 20,000.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. So this is that would be early Illinoisan glaciation, and so that's this is some of the clay. The red color comes from hematite, which is a very highly oxidized form of iron oxide. And here you can see the gravel pebbles in the gravel. So this was, there's a lot of water moving through, able to move pebbles and cobbles. And here I've collected, I took from a 6x6 area, collected 50 cobbles. That's more than, these are generally what, 2 to 4 or 5 inches. And I've grouped them together. This is a little different from a usual glacial outwash because you've got the bedrock exposed adjacent to it, of the Borden siltstone, and then you've also got the limestone above. And so we do have some local Borden siltstone. We've got local geodes, which are, and local limestone, which is silicified limestone. And the way I differentiate them is these aren't aren't oxidized. They've generally got a gray or a white color. Here you can see chert and cobbles with that bronze patina associated with Lafayette gravel. And so I think these are, and interesting thing about the patina, it's not well understood, might be something similar to a desert varnish, what you see in deserts, although desert varnish tends to be black. Manganese oxides, they are very resistant to erosion, so they can be transported, picked up by the glacier and transported in glacial outwash and keep that patina. So most of, a lot of the cobbles are chert and geodes. We've got one conglomerate here, and then quartzite is the next most common type that would have been brought from the Canadian Shield, and then crystalline rocks also brought by the Canadian Shield. So now moving on to canyon forest. This is quite different geologically and equally fascinating. It's a 68-acre preserve in the Crawford Upland, acquired 2012. Features a special geologic interest. The lake created by damming of Richland Creek by the Illinois Glacier lapped against its sandstone cliffs. Had to have. We'll see why I say that. Although there are not any of the lacustrine deposits have long been eroded away. The Mississippian Pennsylvanian unconformity is present. It's also located within the West Baden clastic belt, and that results in an exceptional thickness of cliff-forming sandstone, which was what makes this such a spectacular preserve. And then there's also evidence that the late Mississippian Michigan River system eroded a channel in the Paoli limestone prior to the start of deposition of the West Baden Bethel Formation. I have included in here, I don't have time to really say much, but there is some information I've plotted on the maps. Sycamore Land Trust Clemens Preserve is to the west. It's not a public preserve. It's not very easy to access, even when you try to. But it has some geologic similarities and some of its own unique features. So I've included some information here on that. So the physiography, again, Forest Canyon is in the Crawford Upland. Clemens is also in the Crawford Upland. Here's the topography, ranges from about 715 to 870. I think maybe the topographic map you see on the trail map is a little bit different from that, but I've taken that from this topo sheet. The topography, so Forest Canyon consists of, as best I'm able to determine, 3 of the lower formations of the West Baden group. Which it also has Mansfield Formation, which is above the Mississippian Pennsylvanian unconformity. Clemens has a equally interesting stratigraphic section of the Stevensport group, and actually Clyde Malott has a type section right in that area. So we've got the Mississippian, West Baden, below it but not exposed, the Paoli or the Blue River group, and then the Mansfield Formation. One thing that's really helped in my my studies of the preserve is that the Indiana Geological Survey drilled a hole just a little bit to the east. And so I've shown this, at least part of this core, and it includes the Sample Formation, Beaver Bend Limestone, and the Bethel Formation. So these are the three correspond to the lower part of the West Baden group. Geologically, this is the geologic map. We see again the West Baden formation here. This is the limestones of the Blue River and other, essentially the limestones of the Mitchell Plateau. And the surface soils are silty, windblown deposits that would have been deposited toward the ends of the Wisconsin glaciation. The purple here to the west of the preserve, which runs about like this, is fine-grained lacustrine. So that was deposited by damming of Richland Creek. I've made a guess 150,000 years ago. And for these to have been deposited, there had to have been, the lake would have extended up into the lower part of the preserve. So we kind of have a very tangential relationship connection with the Pleistocene. This is really cool. The Mississippian Pennsylvanian unconformity took place about transition between Mississippi and Pennsylvania around 320 million years ago. And there was before the Pennsylvanian, the sediments of the Mansfield Formation started to be deposited, there was a period of some 3 to 8 million years when all the earlier sediments were exposed and subject to erosion. And so the unconformity crosses, and this is a map that shows all the different geologic formations that the Mansfield Formation crosses. And so the unconformity and the Mansfield Formation was deposited on top of all these different formations. Here we can see the Forest Canyon is right out at the edge of what's left. Most of the Mansfield has been eroded away in this area, but we've got a little bit of Mansfield Formation here. And this is my father-in-law Henry Gray's field map from, I don't know, maybe the 1960s, 70s. And this shows the boundary of the Mansfield Formation. The railroad cut is a great place to see geology. And some features of interest here are right here. There's limestone reported in the cut. They've put gravel on the lower part of the cut, so you can't see, it's not exposed the way it was back when my father-in-law looked at it. But that's an interesting, well, just remember that limestone there. This is the Indiana map contact, and this provides an example of that. This sort of shows how, as you change scales, the boundaries tend to be, smoothed a little bit. So this is more detailed and precise, but when you're compiling maps at a larger scale, you they round a bit. So this is really not recommended for folks to walk the railroad cut. I took the geologist prerogative to do it. And so I was able to find an exposure. This is the preserve, the very boundary of the preserve. This is the Mansfield Formation. And here's Lepidodendron fossil, which is very diagnostic of the Mansfield Formation. This is a map that shows the physiography of the landscape before the Mansfield Formation was deposited on top of the eroded landscape. And so it's constructed from 20,000 wells, subsurface wells. But even with that, now this is very, I would say, imprecise, but an interesting thing we've featured here is, see, they've named the Odin River, the Worthington River, the Evansville River. So these were rivers that eroded the landscape. And this shows, according to this map, you might think that Forest Canyon is in an upland position, but it really, as we'll see, it actually was an extension, a northward extension of what's called here the Odin River. A more general term that's given to the river that deposited the sediments in the late Mississippian is the Michigan River system. So the Michigan River brought sediment, clay, silt, and sand from Canada, drained into a sea, open water where mostly limestones were deposited. And so it had a constantly shifting delta system where sands, shales, siltstones, limestone were deposited. Now, Forest Canyon, I've located here. It doesn't quite fit in here. And I think if the author of this was had been aware of the work that's been done on the West Baden Clastic Belt, he would have drawn rivers here. Whether you look at the previous map here, this doesn't look like a deltaic system, but I think probably it can be interpreted as part of this Michigan River system and the margins of it. So as the sediments were deposited, the basin, sediments gradually sank, more were deposited, and shifting channels of clastic sediments led to deposition of the various interlaid sandstones, shales, limestones that you have in the West Baden and other formations. The West Baden Clastic Belt is, at least as I interpret it, was a remarkably stable channel of the Michigan River system that didn't kind of may have meandered within a certain area, but over millions of years, it deposited primarily sandy sediments, the sandstone bluffs that we see. And Forest Canyon is right on the edge of the clastic belt. And so this cross section is down here. So you're seeing you know, the clastic belt here, but you can see that mostly sandstone in this side, mostly sandstone here. This would correspond to the channel that Forest Canyon is on. And then in between, you've got interlayered siltstone, shales, limestone. Here's Beaver Bend limestone right here. And so it was really exciting. I couldn't, I was really puzzled when I saw the extreme thickness of the sandstone at Forest Canyon until my father-in-law, Henry, pointed out that I was in the clastic belt. And also interesting that Nature Conservancy Greene's Bluff Preserve in Owen County. I'm not sure exactly where I could put that on there, but is also within the clastic belt. And that explains the very thick sandstones that you have at Greene's Bluff as well. And so where you would expect to have interlayered sandstone, limestone, the Beaver Bend limestone, and then maybe some shales and more sandstone, we've got this almost continuous sandstone. What was happening was in the main channel, the sandy sediments were being deposited, while off to the sides, because this is a deltaic system, still very wet. There are areas where it was wet enough and open enough for limestone to be deposited, or for shales to be deposited. So as the sediments of the Bethel Formation, the Beaver Bend limestone, and the Sample Formation, which is mostly sandstone, but it also has some shales. While those were being deposited on either side of Forest Canyon, you're just getting mostly sandstones deposited in Forest Canyon. So another interesting feature, and it took me a little while to figure this out, but these maps help me understand this, is that before the Mississippi and Pennsylvania unconformity, there was and the deposition of the West Baden group, there was a pause. Essentially, the Paoli limestone was exposed to erosion, and there was some localized erosion of the Paoli limestone. And so this map shows the thickness of the Paoli limestone and places where it's absent. And so here we see this corresponds to the, maybe not precisely, but roughly the channel of the clastic belt. So there's not data here, or I'm not sure why, but essentially I would trace this channel up to Forest Canyon right here. And I'll explain why in the next slide. What's interesting is the Illinois Geological Survey Corps, which is not far away from this. The Paoli limestone is 50 feet thick. So again, Forest Canyon is right located amazingly within this channel eroded into the Paoli limestone. And here, this is what led me to that conclusion. So we have, these are water well logs. Water well logs, you can get some fairly good geology from water well logs, but water well drillers aren't geologists. So it's not so easy to pin down precise formations or anything like this, but we know that in this area, the base of the West Baden group rests on top of either the Blue River group, with the Paoli limestone being the uppermost part of the Blue River group. And look at the elevations here, 706, 710. Get off to the side here, 737. Up here, 769. Because you can tell from a well log very clearly where the limestone starts. Here, 743. So we've got a channel here, probably just about the upper reach of the channel. 755, either side here, 64, 777, and then the IGS core is 780. Up here, we've got limestone 813, 800. So there's a channel eroded here. And then the deposition of the West Baden group and the clastic belt resumed. Oh, yeah. So here's a summary of geologic field observations. Yeah, I'm coming in pretty close to an hour here. So I'll point out a few things here. So the Mansfield is caps the high points. You don't see it except in the railroad cut. You don't see it at exposed. It's not really it has some sandy parts, but it's not a ledge forming formation. Ranges from 840 to 870. In the railroad cut is what I interpret as the Beaver Bend limestone at an elevation about 840. This was on Henry Gray's field map. It actually was from observations made along the railroad cut in the 1930s, I think. So this the trail takes you to the very top of a ledge, and then you see a series of ledges. And I measured roughly, not as precisely as a field geologist who was really mapping, but used my rod at a level, measured this section, and going down the creek, got a thickness of about 75 feet. So we have limestone in the railroad cut. I've looked at all the stream beds, no limestone blocks, which you would expect if there were a significant limestone feature. I have found 2 locations of isolated boulders of limestone at about 770 feet, right on the north edge. And so that tells me that we're right on the edge of the clastic belt. And there was a time when very local limestone deposits were made, but basically, sandstone. There'll be some interlayers of maybe siltstone and shale. You don't have a continuous cliff of, but virtually all sandstone. And the one place I found siltstone is upstream from the spectacular Box Canyon on the east end of the preserve. So, so here's some siltstone above the Box Canyon. Here's a limestone block. But I've just, like I said, I keep looking for more limestone, and I've only got these 2 locations so far where I've just got 2 or 3 blocks of limestone that I would interpret as being more or less in situ, but just very patchy deposits of limestone at the preserve. And then here's the measured section. on the right here. So this is what I measured. Here you've got ledge here, and then these are just different parts of the section. And so I think that, yeah, that brings us to the end of my presentation, and didn't do too bad, 8:02. So I'd be happy to open up for questions, and why don't I just stop sharing here?
Well, thank you so much, Russell. Let me pull up the chat here and see if anyone has any questions. I just mentioned, gosh, I think this all this research you did out there came about of what seemed like a very innocent question of, hey, Russell, you know, there are these cool rock outcrops at the Canyon Forest. What I can't figure out what formation it's in. What do you think?
And it took me a long time. I mean, it was a real puzzle when I went out there the first time. And I say I have been fortunate to have some conversations with, well, my father-in-law, and there are a number of geologists at the survey who are in the process of re-examining this sequence in the state as part of a kind of a updated mapping process. I've been in conversation with them, and they have until now they've been working to the south, but this year, next year, they tell me that they'll be working in this area. And so I will qualify this whole presentation by saying it may be subject to some modifications when we get some geologists who really know about this. I don't claim any expertise on sedimentary geology. I've been very much learning as I've been going on this, but you know, they've I've appreciated their input, and I'm pretty confident now. Even when I talked to them, I wasn't too sure, but that the sequence at Canyon Forest encompasses the Bethel, the Beaver Bend, and the lower part of the sample formation. And so, and what's distinctive is at the preserve and in the clastic belt, where limestones were reasonably thick limestones were being deposited throughout the area, they were not being deposited in the clastic belt. So you have an appearance that the Beaver Bend limestone is missing. It's simply that the sandy sediments were deposited contemporaneously with the Beaver Bend limestone elsewhere.
Wow, well, that's a real time machine there, thinking back and to what that looked like when those deposits were being made. It's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah,
it really is. You see those lepidodendron impressions, and you know, we have those at our Dishman Quarry Preserve, of course,
right,
and others know about, and it's just, yeah, hard to believe. Gosh, those were growing here, you know, where I'm standing today. That's amazing. So
yeah. Well, one thing that puzzles me a little bit about Canyon Forest is that the Mansfield, and in part this may be just because I haven't mapped these formations, so a geologist familiar with them could, you know, with the Mansfield formation, you know, could come across an outcrop, say, oh, that's the Mansfield. I don't know formations like that, but it seems that the Mansfield at Canyon Forest is very erosive. I mean, subject to erosion, because there's been, you know, before the pines were planted and the you know, on the ridgetop area, that was very badly eroded land. And actually, I've been thinking of asking Dave Dilcher, I don't, or John, I don't know anybody who's been there, you know, some years ago. I would guess that there may even have been, you know, eroded badly enough that there were gullies that you didn't have any vegetation. It's that badly eroded. And so I don't know whether that's a, you know, characteristic of the Mansfield just in this area, or but it's and another interesting thing that I saw when we were there a couple of days ago with Bonnie and Hayden, I found in the trail a crawdad, a little crawdad. I don't know what you call them. You know, they built a little bit of a kind of little mound,
little chimneys. Yeah,
crawdad chimney.
Yeah, there may be other names for it.
And you think of crawdads as being in very wet soil, but and so usually the chimney is going to be gray or, you know, dark colored. This was that very yellowish brown soil. So that's another kind of unusual thing that I'm not quite sure what to how to explain. But there's some, I'm really looking forward to be able to visit Canyon Forest with once the geologists who are, you know, working in this area, and you know, see what additional insights they might have.
That would be fascinating. Great. Well, I got you, Russell. I think you just answered it all. What can you say?
Okay. Carol's got a question.
I did have one.
Carol, well, jump on in, Carol.
I did have a question.
Jump in, sir.
Are there any evidences of those halloysite clays in the unconformity region there?
Halloysite clay.
Kaolin?
Kaolin. Okay. Yeah. I remember you saying that there's some kaolin deposits in Lawrence County and Crawford Upland you've been seeing. I don't know. And that's something that, I mean, the Mansfield Formation per se, where the stratigraphic column, Carol, do you know that those kaolins are?
You know, I would have to go back and look at that literature again. I've been working in that area. I think that's Beach Creek, Mansfield area there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, the Mansfield, I mean, you saw from that map that it, you know, it spans, I mean, geologically what it overlies, you know, just the whole, broad sequence. And normally, I mean, the classic Mansfield is very sandy. I mean, it's got gravel. Often you have gravel in the base in the sandstone. And the Mansfield at Forest Canyon doesn't have that character at all. So it can, you know, vary quite a bit. And so that's, I mean, I'll maybe pick Henry's brain and the other geologists about that.
It appears that some of that kaolin deposit, those clays have been found in Monroe County. And so I thought maybe the trend as we proceed up the unconformity to the northwest could logically perhaps have something like that in your area there.
Well, okay. I don't think the unconformity really extends into Monroe County, or at least very let me bring up, let me here. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, we're gonna be able to get index and conformity. So, okay, yeah, well, you can see here, they're just isolated patches of Mansfield in Monroe County. So if you say that the kaolin has been found in Bloomington, then apparently it would be associated with the Mansfield. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Yes, that's great questions, Carol. Thank you. Let's see.
Well, I learned a lot.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I thank you for that date, 180. That was a bit older than I, because that's really, Henry, could you weigh in on that? 180,000, that's pretty early Illinoisan, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say that and also the error, as you know, Russ, on this chronology is 10 or 15%. So it may be if we do more runs on the sample, it'll maybe go towards 160. We've had some that seem to be too young. You know,
Right.
it's sort of gone both ways. Like some of them are 120 and some of them are 180 or 190. So
Yeah,
we sort of have a sense that it should be around 160.
yeah,
160,000. So yeah, yeah, that's
yeah. I think they are planning on running at least one more sample on Paintown, are they? Or I know they
Yeah,
collected enough.
yeah, I think there's two that are pretty good samples. And I don't know if we've run both of them. I know one of them has at least partially been run.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and Jose Luis tells me that he just this week opened up the Hayesville cores from Patoka area to start running. So that's okay. Thanks.
Well, great. Thanks so much. Boy, if Carol Ritter says he learned a lot, then that's what I call an informative talk. So can't beat that. So that's high praise indeed. I certainly learned a lot, but I don't know nearly as much about geology. So always a pleasure to have you and the rest of the geology gang around. It's great to have Carol and Henry here and others to jump in with a little information and insightful questions. So really appreciate it. So I guess if there's nothing else, I think I will. Oh,
Could
yeah.
could I just ask Carol?
Sure.
What prompted your question about the Highland Rim Lexington peneplains?
I've been studying the geology of Lawrence County for a presentation, and I'm getting into lower mental plain, upper mental plain, and then that peneplain prior, and sort of digging around to see what exposures exist within Lawrence County and some of the residual products that are evidential of those sequential stages.
Okay, what were the different stages you mentioned?
I've just some of the sequential stages in the deposition and erosion of the peneplain and the upper.
Oh,
and lower
peanut,
end,
okay, yeah,
Blue
yeah,
River
I-
Strath and all those Strath things.
right, yeah, and that's, so, um, so the ridgetop occurrences of the Lafayette gravel, that's, I say that, the base of the gravel is, was the lowest point in the landscape of the Highland Rim peneplain. And since these are right at the ridgetop, basically my interpretation of that is that all the say major drainage divides, you just follow all the major drainage divides, like Bean Blossom Creek between Indian Creek and Bean Blossom, North Fork Salt Creek, those ridges, those represent are an approximation of what the elevation of the Highland Rim peneplain was in southern Indiana. And so what that also says is that everything below that elevation has been eroded since the end of the Pliocene and during the Pleistocene. And I've actually used that information, I've made some estimates of how much erosion has taken place. And it's from bedrock to the elevation of the base of the Lafayette gravel. And I've calculated that for about 5 different locations. One of them being up Pipe Creek. You're familiar with the Pipe Creek quarry, where they found, this is in northern Indiana, where they found quartzite pebbles from Virginia. And they have fossils that date to the Miocene. And so what that says is that was the old, I'd say the ancestral Taze River system. And I still haven't, still working on convincing my colleagues, although Henry and I are at least in agreement on certain aspects of this, but let me go, let's see here, bring up. I won't be offended if anybody leaves, but we're still within our time, I think. So if you bear with me. Let's see where. Get back to index. Distribution. Okay, this map here, interestingly, shows the Taze River going across northern Indiana. So this is a reconstruction of the probably late tertiary. So the dominant view of geologists is the Taze River is pre-Pleistocene. Minority view, which Henry Gray and a few others hold, is that it took place during the Pleistocene, and I feel there's evidence that the first, in the early Pleistocene, the first major river, or the first major continental glacier that came into Indiana about 2 million years ago, only came up to the northern part of the state. Before that, the Taze River in Ohio flowed north into what's now Lake Erie and to the St. Lawrence. So that glacier blocked that Taze River, which heads in New River Canyon in Virginia, huge drainage area. All of that flow was blocked by the glacier, and so it's diverted across Indiana into the Mississippi River system. And so that, say, by my interpretation, about 2 million years ago. And then the glacier that has the deposited the glacial erratics that you find at Downey Hill and at Trevlack Bluffs. That was about 1.3 million years ago. And that blocked the Taze River and diverted the Taze River into what's now the Ohio River. So the ancestral Ohio River had its headwaters at about Madison before that mid-Pleistocene glacier blocked the Taze River and channeled all that water into the Ohio, what's now the Ohio River. So roundabout way of saying, so I haven't plotted this as it's not really a Lafayette type gravel. Well, some senses it is, because the Pipe Creek quarry is in a broad upland area. And there's sinkholes there that have these fossils, and they found these quartzite pebbles. But it's, I'm not sure. Yeah, kind of maybe around here or so, but quite close to the channel of the Taze River. And so we know that there was a river deposited quartz pebbles from Appalachia here in northern Indiana in the Miocene. So that landscape is in vary. So I would, I don't think it's been formally done. The Highland Rim, generally tends to refer to southern Indiana, but I would extend the peneplain up to pretty much all of northern Indiana, Illinois. So that peneplain was the river flowed there, deposited those channels. So if you take the difference in elevation from the Pipe Creek sinkhole to the base of the Taze River, very deeply buried, it's all buried with glacial deposits. I can't remember precisely, but I think it's on the order of 300-foot difference in elevation. Erosion took place from the level of the Pipe Creek sinkhole. And I'm getting orders of, hundreds of feet of down cutting during the Pleistocene in the places where I've got a gravel, ridgetop gravel adjacent to a stream bed where I can estimate the depth of bedrock.
One last thing I might just mention as far as John and Sycamore Land Trust interest is the Mount Carmel is very close to our Oakley Preserve in Lawrence County. We have the anticline, the Denison Dome, and the Mount Carmel. We were over there looking at the dip down on Guthrie Creek. That's very proximate to our Oakley Preserve, and that might be something John's interested in doing a little bit of background on to include in our portfolio on what's going on in the Oakley area there.
Yeah, that's great, Carol. I would have to look at the map in that area, but I'd just say the Back Creek is near there too, of course, as you know. So of course, Oakley's open to the public, so it's always fun to talk about those. So yeah, very interesting.
Another thing I'll mention is when I was trying to track down the Lafayette gravel, kind of follow up to what Carol and I were doing, I visited the Jeremy Oakley Preserve, and in the gravel on the house adjacent to that, there are chert pebbles of Lafayette gravel. And I've seen a number of other when I was out there. So there's got to be a source of Lafayette gravel that somebody's mixing in with the limestone. And so that's something I'd like to pin down. But there's yeah, I know we've got a significant new occurrence of Lafayette gravel in near the headwaters of Guthrie Creek, and but I'm really curious about where that Lafayette gravel came from at Jeremy Oakley. It's just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, that's right. Remember you got in touch and trying to determine where the neighbors bought their gravel from. So interesting. Yeah, you never know. Well, any other we're kind of winding down here. Any other comments or questions from anybody before we wrap it up?
Well, thank you for listening, everybody. I enjoyed
Well, thank you
preparing
so
for it.
much.
Thank you.
Always informative. Thanks again, Russell, and we'll keep asking you geology questions. Don't worry.
Okay.
Everyone, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, and hope you can tune in for the next talk on fireflies.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So bye-bye.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.